Hey everybody, welcome back. So, a couple things different about this video. First of all, I tried a slightly different layout with the the board and the camera and everything, so I thought I'd try out something new. Second of all, this video is going to be a little bit longer because I had some suggestions saying, hey, try making a longer video where you spend a little bit more time and going into depth with it. And so that's what I'm going to be doing today. So this game is played by Tarrasch as the white pieces, and as the black pieces, there's a guy named Thorhold playing. And so let's go ahead and go through it. So we have the French defense, the best opening that there is, scientifically proven, and in my opinion is not biased in any way when I say that, at all. And okay, so we're going to see the Tarrasch variation. If I had an opening named after me, I would play that as well. So the queen takes back in this variation. Sometimes you'll see players take with the pawn here, and you'll get that isolated queen, this pawn position eventually when this pawn one day takes, and the black pieces will be left with the pawn on d5. And some players don't like playing with that pawn weakness because potentially the isolated pawn can become a weakness. But the upside to having the only pawn in the center is it does give you better center control. So some players like playing this way. And yeah, in this game though, we're going to see the queen taking, which this has the advantage of not getting the potentially isolated pawn. And the downside though is you're bringing your queen out early, so that means that your queen is going to be vulnerable to tempo gaining attacks. The pawn takes. This pawn can't really be held though, but the black pieces are temporarily up a pawn. Bishop c4, developing pieces with tempo like we should. Okay, and here's where you can kind of see the development, because the black pieces only have out the queen, but meanwhile the white pieces are castled and have out 3 minor pieces. Okay, knight c6. Okay, so temporarily holding the pawn with knight c6 again. You're trying to, you're defending it for now. But e5 is a move that will not work to hold on to the pawn, and it's not too difficult to see why, because the white pieces can just take it, and if the queen takes the knight, well then you're getting pinned. So that doesn't work. Okay, so knight c6. Knight b3, and now there's 3 attackers on the pawn. That's on d4. Okay, and here e5 is played, and we're going to see the knight take. Queen takes on d1, because if the queen takes again, that same rook to e1 gets played, and if you take the knight on e5, then you lose your queen. So that's not advisable. So queen takes, rook takes, knight takes, rook e1, and we pin the knight. So the knight is going to be regained. There's no way to hold on to that, because after f6 we play f4. We attack the knight with the pawn, so we're going to gain that piece back. Bishop to b4. Bishop d2, bishop takes, knight takes. Takes, it castles, because you have the potentials for discover attacks if the king does not castle. Like this pawn could maybe take, and then you give the check while you're taking the pawn. And so that's why they just go ahead and castle to get out of it. And bishop takes, and okay, we're playing rook to c1 check, just because it just gets the rook into the game while pushing the king over. And those are the kind of like subtle things that you want to be doing, because okay, it just gets the rook in, but they're pushing their king farther away from the center, and this is the stage of the game where you're going to want to be starting to think about bringing your king closer, and so they're pushing it farther away and also getting the rook into the game. Okay, rook takes, And really, this game is still pretty even so far, we've seen, mostly. There hasn't really been too much of anything big happening. Tarrasch has just mostly held a really small advantage for most of the game. Like, really, really minor. Like, if you actually look at the computer, it says 0.2 right now of an advantage to the white pieces. So not very big. And this is really what this game's going to be focusing on, is how he has such a small advantage and keeps pressing it. Okay, doubling the rooks, right? So now there's that. He has the rooks that are doubled, whereas these rooks are on the back rank. Okay, so the rook takes, and now you should think, how do we take back? As the black pieces, because there's you might think in an endgame things might not matter so much, but actually in reality it matters which way you take back here. You might just be thinking, oh, it doesn't matter, but if you just take with the rook, well then takes knight b3, and then this pawn is not going to be able to be defended. And then the white pieces are just up a pawn in an endgame with knights, which would be really good for the white pieces because knight endgames are tough to deal with if you just have a pawn. So this would be a... Yeah, I've heard it said that knight endgames are like pawn endgames, basically. I think it was Botvinnik that said that, if I'm not mistaken. And so we also know that pawn endgames with you're up just one pawn is almost always winning. But you still gotta be careful, pawn endgames, you gotta be careful. Okay, so that's why knight takes e8 is played. Rook to e7. Rooks love to be on the 7th rank, right? Because that's where all of the pawns start, and some of them are still here, so it ties down the black pieces. It also makes it so that the king can't move up, right? And we're in the end game, so we want to be getting our king into the game. But now he's tied down, and he has to worry about defending things. So yeah, that's why the rook likes to be on the 7th rank. a6, knight to b3, b6. So now some of these pawns are moved off of the 7th rank. If you move those pawns off the 7th rank, sometimes the rook will lose some of its strength because it's not really attacking any of the pawns anymore. The king is still tied down, but now there's 2 pawns that are not potentially attacked by the rook on the 7th rank. So it's trying to undo some of what that rook's attacking. Okay, and now if you want to try to find a tactic, you might want to pause here to try to find the move that's played. And in the game, here we go. So in the game, knight takes d4. Because this move, you might be thinking, well, hey, the rook's defending the pawn. But this rook is overworked. It's defending both the knight and the pawn. So should the rook now take this knight, well, now you're going to lose this knight. And this is what happens in the game. King c7, rook e3, we're dropping back to defend our pawn. And this is where things really get started. This is like what I'll call Act 2. Because this is where like the really, really good endgame stuff starts to happen. Because we have a rook endgame. And right now you're just up 1 pawn. And if you're in a rook endgame where you're just up 1 pawn, that's really tough to win. Because there's a saying I've heard where people will say, well, all rook endgames are drawn. Because it's just so likely that if you have just 1 rook and your opponent has 1 rook, even with 1 extra pawn, it's still really tough to press that win. You may have seen things like the Philidor endgame, where if you get down to 1 pawn and 1 king and just a rook, well, you can draw that. You may have seen that. And I actually considered breaking this into 2 videos, because I thought this might be good to have in 2 separate areas, but again, I was saying longer videos, so that's why we're doing this. Okay, so realizing that it's pretty difficult to win if you're just up 1 pawn. One of the big things to do is take your time. Don't rush too much, because if you make a mistake when you're rushing, trying to force things, well, you might wind up making a mistake and losing that edge that you had. And so, try to wear down your opponent, because they're constantly defending. And so you can like keep trying to wear them down and make them defend things that can make things more difficult for them. And it might, mentally wear them down. They might stop figuring out what's really going on, and they might make some mistakes. Okay, King D7, King F2. We're getting our king into the game because we're gonna need the king to help out if we're gonna win. We can't use just the rook. Okay, G6, and this is a move that I really like. I really think that this is a great move here because it really helps to show some of those endgame ideas. Rook to H3, because okay, we're targeting this pawn here, and we're making it so that after they defend, we get to do two different things. One, King E3. Now the king moves to E3, which means the king is now the piece that's defending the pawn, and our rook can go attack things now, because our king is now the piece defending, right? We want our more powerful rook to be the one attacking. We're also taking control of D4, the square in front of the pawn, which we want to be able to push. We want this pawn to promote, right? So we're going to have to take control of the squares in front and slowly push that pawn down the board if we want to win. Another thing this move does is now the rook, okay, now that it's attacked this pawn and it's forced it to advance to H5, now the pawn on G6 is weak because there's no pawn defending it, right? So we forced a weakness and we switched out the guards of the E3 pawn. We're taking control. We're multi-purpose. That's what we want to be doing, right? Making multi-purpose moves with every chance we get, because we only get one move when we play. So we should be trying to accomplish as much of that as we can. Pawn to D4. We want to push our pawn. We want to promote it, so we should push it whenever we get a chance. Check. King D3. Rook G3. We're attacking the pawn. Rook E6. Rook E3. And of course we would love them to exchange and take the rook, because should we exchange rooks, that's a winning pawn endgame, right? We have an extra pawn. We can push this down the board, distract our opponent's king, and then take some pawns over here or over here by distracting them with this guy here on D4. And then we can easily do what I call the fox and the chicken coop, when you just have your king taking all of your opponent's pawns, because the king is going to have to take time to deal with this guy when you can go and run after the other pawns. So they can't exchange rooks because it's an automatic winning king and pawn endgame. Okay. Rook E5, Rook F6, A4. So remember how we were saying the rook is powerful if it invades the 7th, or in this case 2nd rank? Well, the pawn A4, what he was doing is starting to move the pawns up. That way there's less of a chance for his opponent to start attacking those pawns. Rook E2. Again, rook exchange is fine with us because we get a winning king and pawn endgame. So they avoid the exchange. B4, we're pushing our pawns. We're eliminating the potential for those pawns to be attacked by the rook on the 2nd rank. And also we're pushing our pawns closer to where we can promote, right? Because we want to be doing every little thing to try to make our position more winning. So if these pawns are now 2 squares up, well, they're slightly closer to the promotion squares. So if we were to make it to an endgame where we say we get rid of the rooks, well, now it's a little bit easier to win because our pawns are farther advanced. So if we get rid of the rooks, an easier win. Because, potentially we take these guys and our pawns are now on the 4th rank instead of the 2nd rank. So they're closer to the promotion squares. Again, every little thing possible to make it a little bit more winning. Rook E5, Rook F2, and Rook G5, because this way we defend the pawn on G2 while attacking the pawn on G6. So, Rook goes back to F6, King D6, King E4, Rook E6, and Rook E5. Again, we're fine with the exchange of rooks because we would get a winning king and pawn endgame. D5, every chance we get to push the pawn, we should do it. Rook G5. Okay, Rook G5, this 3's E5 for our king, because we're eventually going to put our king there. Rook F3, again, same idea. We're fine with an exchange of rooks. King E5. Now here our king is. We're fighting for the promotion square. Okay, So right here, there's actually a little tactic that's threatened if the black pieces play a random move here. Like, let's say they play just a random move. Let's give, I don't know, let's just say a5. Yeah, so f5, you can play rook to f7 check, because you would force the exchange of rooks, winning king and pawn endgame. Right? And now your king is the bodyguard of these 3 squares, and you can safely run your pawn up. Yeah, so that's just an example. Okay, so let's go back. So what was actually played is rook to d8, because, avoiding rook to f7, because you don't want the exchange of rooks. That removes any chance of defending. Okay. d6 check again, and, you still can't put this rook here, because, and then this was not what was played, but just to show you, because it looks like, well, hey, there's 2 attackers, right? But it doesn't work, because same idea, rook to f7, takes, and then you're going to win these pawns on a6 and b6, and you're going to promote your pawns, and you're going to win that way. So in the game, after d6, king to d7. So this pawn has made quite a journey already. It's gone, it started on d3, and now it's made it all the way to d6. It's getting a little bit closer. You can kind of hear that Jaws music playing. They're getting closer to the win. Okay. Rook to f7, and in this game, so they play king to c8, but if I was the black pieces, I would be tempted to play king to c6, and maybe you can figure out why I would be tempted to play king to c6. Because I would instantly lose the game to rook to c7, so that's why if I was playing a game, I would wind up playing this move and I would lose. Because one of 2 reasons. Either 1, I wouldn't see it and then I'd get mated, or 2, I would just want to end the game because I realized I'm losing. Okay. King to c8. Rook c7, king b8. And rook c2. So now you see the black king, he's kind of cut off away. He can't really help out the defense of this pawn. Meanwhile, you have the king, and he's going to help push the pawn forward. This king's kind of out of the game. King f6, b5, d7. We're 1 square away from the promotion square. King e7, rook h7, king d6, rook e2, and then finally, after so many moves of just slowly inching the pawn forward 1 square at a time, now there's no way to stop rook to e8, right? Like, this move is going to happen. And then you're going to either win the rook in the corner, or you're going to promote your pawn. Whatever it is that happens, you're going to win this position. So this is where the black pieces finally resigned. So yeah, so this game, I really like this one because of all this rook endgame play. I love endgames. And this was like some really great rook endgame stuff here. Just slowly inching your pawn forward 1 square at a time, taking control of the promotion square. That's such an important idea as well. If you get 1 extra pawn, taking control of the promotion, or not only just the promotion square, but the square in front of the pawn is such an important idea. I remember a game I played in a tournament back a while ago, and I remember that I just was like slowly pushing the pawn. And I remembered this game where you just take control of the square in front of the pawn, and I eventually won the game because I just kept using that same idea, just going after the square in front of the pawn and running it down the board. Yeah, and yeah, so this was such a great game. I love the rook endgame, and yeah, hopefully like this video being usually a little bit longer. Usually I keep my videos around like 10 minutes. Well, this one's going to come out to about 20 minutes. So tell me what you think. If you like longer videos, or if you prefer the shorter ones, let me know. Or maybe you think I should make them even longer than this. Let me know, in the comments, like the video and all of that. Because that'll help. And also, liking the video, I think it affects the YouTube algorithm and makes people see your videos more frequently. So, go ahead and do all that. And, recommend me to anybody who likes chess. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching.